Hello, HornLakeTV.com. Mr. Lewis here with Miss Hopkins, the librarian at Horn Lake High School, and we're going to talk briefly about what you are about to see. Now, over the Thanksgiving holidays, you went to the Capitol and you talked to the curator. Tell us a little bit about the trip.
It was wonderful. Brenda Davis is the curator for our Mississippi State Capitol, and she agreed to sit down with me and just give me a history of the Capitol and the building and the architecture, and just to give me a little bit of information.
Now, what's terribly interesting about this, and I'm a history nerd, I've just come clean, but what's very interesting is there is a rich history in the state of Mississippi that most people don't even realize, because they assume, since we're not as prominent of a state as New York or California, that our history would not be as deep or historical. But in a lot of ways, it's even more so.
Yes.
And this building is, it's something else. I had no clue that we were on a landmark site, which is a big deal. It's a way bigger deal than you would assume. And that our Capitol's architecture is some of the earliest of that style in the entire nation.
It is.
So you're gonna find out a lot of really interesting things by checking out this video. So without further ado, here you go.
Well, good morning. We are here with Mrs. Brenda Davis, and she is the curator of our Mississippi State Capitol building. And she's going to talk to us a little bit today about the history of the Capitol and just some unusual facts that you might not know about the Capitol building here in Jackson, Mississippi. So, Mrs. Davis, tell us a little bit about how Jackson came to be the capital of the state of Mississippi.
I certainly will, and let me say that it's my honor not only to be the curator of the Mississippi State Capitol, but to be able to have this experience with you today. In 1822, the first Capitol was actually completed on the corner of Capitol and President Street. It was a two-story structure that no longer stands today. Prior to that, 3 commissioners had been appointed by the legislature to find a location suitable to be the capital of the state, the new state, because we had just been a state a few years in that era. And their central concern was to find something centrally located so that it's easily accessible from all parts of the state, and also navigable by water, which was important back in those days because that was the main transportation, of course, other than just rough roads here and there, was by water. So on the banks of LaFleur's Bluff is where the city of Jackson was formed. And this all took place, as I said, between 1820 and 1822. The first meeting of the legislature in that first Capitol building that I mentioned, it no longer stands, and it was just a 2-story small structure. They met on Christmas Eve, 1822. Yeah, when you read that, you're like, really? Well, they sure had a different way of doing things back then. As the state began to grow, a new Capitol was called for, and that new Capitol was built in 1839. It was completed in 1839. And remained our capital until the current Mississippi State Capitol was built. And now, today, people call that Capitol building the old Capitol, and they call this one the new Capitol. So we still call it the new Capitol after 115 years. When the old Capitol was constructed, the architect that was hired to do it was rather inexperienced. And he was particularly inexperienced with our unique soils in the Jackson area. For those of you who've never traveled here, or when you do, our roads shift, our buildings shift. And so the foundation was laid for the old Capitol, and the building had started to be built, and the architect was fired. And the man they hired to take his place was a man named William Nichols. And Mr. Nichols was a preeminent architect in the South. He had been the architect for North Carolina and for Alabama. And so he was hired to come in and take this project over and make it a success. And we're talking again in the late 1830s. Mr. Nichols inherited an insufficient foundation, and he did not know it. There were no testings to be done. There were no geotechnical engineers. They tested soils back in those days. And of course, there were no monumental buildings in Jackson. So after the Capitol, the old Capitol we call it today, was completed in 1839, they moved in, and within a few decades, the building began to show signs of disrepair. By the 1890s, there were calls for a new Capitol to be built, because that Capitol was beginning to literally come apart at the seams because the soils had shifted, and they did not know how to prevent that back in those days. It went through 2 governors and 2 different legislatures in the 1890s of them saying, we need a new Capitol, but where? They would argue. We need a new Capitol, but who's going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? The same concerns you'd have today. Where to put it, how to pay for it. It would be the exact same concerns. So when a man named Andrew Houston Lashno ran for governor in 1899, he, as part of his platform, he promised that if he were elected governor, he would see to it that we had a new state house built. And Governor Lashno was elected, and when he first addressed the Joint Assembly, what we call the State of the State address today, he said to the legislatures, their meeting in that Joint Assembly, to lay aside all minor differences and come together and give the people of Mississippi a capital that was a reflex, was the word he used, of the public spirit and the pride and integrity of the state. That was in February of 1900 that he said that. And they listened to him and gave him the full authority to move forward. They named him the chairperson of the State House Commission, and they gave him the authority to spend $1 million in bonds up to that point. Well, here's the State House Commission. There are 5 men serving on the State House Commission, and another man who served as the secretary of the commission. Well, the first thing they have to do is find the design and find the architect. And they did, I think, a brilliant thing. They put ads in 5 newspapers around the state of Mississippi, advertising for architects to submit their design and their ideas about what the new Mississippi Capitol would look like. They got back 14 responses. And so I'm not in the room, of course, but this is the way I envision it. The governor of the state was the chairperson, as I said, of this committee, and the State House Commission, and he was a trained attorney. The Attorney General was also on there. So these professional men who have other professions other than serving on this commission are looking at these plans, and somebody must have said, does anybody know how to read these? I mean, what do we have here? Number one, can we build it for $1 million? Even if we like the way it looks, can we really build it for $1 million? And the most important thing is, will it be a stable building? Because they were still located in a building that was not stable any longer. Even the state newspaper was calling for a new Capitol to be built. So they were able to somehow, and we don't know how, hire a consultant. His name was Bernard Green. And Mr. Green had just completed a project that would be one of his signatures for the rest of his life. He was one of the designers and contractors of the Thomas Jefferson Building of the Library of Congress. And for those of you who've not had the opportunity to see that building, I encourage you to be sure to, if you're in Washington, D.C., to see that building. And if you've seen the state capitol, Mississippi State Capitol, you're going to see some similarities. So Mr. Green has this challenge of picking the architect. So they did another smart thing, this commission did. These guys made some good decisions. They took the names off the plans so that Mr. Green would not say, oh yes, I've heard about him, or oh yes, I've heard about him. And it was all him. There were no female architects back in those days. So the 14 gentlemen that had sent their plans in, they took the names off the plans and gave them to Mr. Green with numbers only. So as he's choosing basically on his knowledge and not on anybody's reputation, good or bad. So he chooses plan number 5, and plan number 5 belonged to a man named Theodore Link. And Mr. Link was an architect from St. Louis, Missouri. So that's how we happened to get to the final process. And you can tell that story in 10 minutes, but when you think about it, it literally took 10 years for them to decide, yes, we can afford to pay for it, and yes, we're going to tear down the old state penitentiary that's really located in downtown Jackson, which is what used to be where our Capitol sits today. Looking back on it, it seems like a pretty easy decision, but for some reason it took a long time to get to that point.
And what year was our Capitol building finished?
It was started and broke ground in the winter of 1901. The contract was let in January of 1901. Remember, they have $1 million budget, and Mr. Link. And this worked so well for us, and one of those fortuitous things that you don't see it until later. He not only had been trained in Europe in architecture, he had also been trained in engineering. And so that engineering helped him on the design of this building, particularly on the foundation. I would imagine one of the first things he was told was, be sure it doesn't shift like the other one has shifted, and it hasn't. In 115 years, it has not.
That's impressive.
And a lot of that was to do with the fact that they literally went down, their plan was to go down twice as much on the foundation. They wound up going almost 20 feet down in places to reinforce this foundation, which back in those days was an amazing feat because they did not have all the equipment that we would have today to do that. So that was, I would say, one of the best things about his engineering training is that he was able to combine both of those skills. The first bid that came in well over $1 million, so he had to go back in and revamp the plans. The second bid came in over $1 million. And remember, they only have $1 million to spend, and so he revamped it a third time. And every time he would make changes, contractors would fall away. They didn't want to come back and rebid on something they had already tried to get and didn't get. So they came to the third bid. The winning contractor was the Wells brothers from Chicago. And in January of 1901, the Wells brothers were given their contract, and in the contract from the state of Mississippi, the State House Commission, it said that they had 28 months to finish this building, regardless of the weather. Remember, the contract was signed like in January. So they're saying, don't come back in here tomorrow and say it's cold. We're giving you 28 months, which is unthinkable today. Mm-hmm. With all the advances we have in building and equipment and technology, you would never be able to build this building in 28 months. To me, it's just astounding that they did. So they set about to get it done, and sure enough, in June of 1903, it was dedicated, and in August of 1903, they were moving into it. So it's amazing.
That is amazing. That timetable is amazing. I look around and I see just some beautiful architecture, and it looks like very expensive materials. But can you tell us a little bit about some of the materials?
I'm so glad you said very expensive materials because you just heard me say that the bid had to be done more than one time. The way that Mr. Link reduced the cost of this building was he took out a lot of the real marble. And I'm not sure if it shows up in the camera, but in this room you have a material called Skylights. It is, it's Mississippians want to pronounce it with every vowel in it, so we want to say Scagliola, and some of us do. And some of us take the shortcut and say skag, but that's only a few people that do that because I don't even like the way that sounds. I won't try to do the true Italian version of it, but it's something like Scagliola is the way it's pronounced. You can Google it and let the little icon that tells you how to pronounce it. They'll pronounce it for you. Scagliola is a gypsum-based material that then in turn is painted or stained to look like marble, and that is throughout this building. We have one of the largest collections of Scagliola in the Mississippi State Capitol of any public building in America. And it has different names depending upon the color. The color in this room that we're in is called sienna, and you can see that sienna tone in it. and you see that in our legislative chambers, you see it in our corridors. We do have marble here. We have 10 different types of real marble. Some is domestic. It came from Tennessee and Vermont and places like that. But some is imported. It came from our biggest collection of white marble is in our Rotunda, our second floor Rotunda, and it's Italian marble. And again, you think about those 28 months. They had 28 months to get this marble shipped here from various parts of the country. Vermont was another place from which the marble came. The exterior of the building is stone, and it is Indiana limestone, and the base of the building is Georgia granite. We also have some Georgia marble here. So different types of marble, different types of scaiola throughout the building. Fast forward 115 years, and the problem with scaiola is, like I said, it's gypsum based, so it's like a plaster, and over time it does crack, just like plaster does. And so it's very expensive to repair. So it was, back then, marble was so expensive, they made that compromise to use the scaiola. And now we have this wonderful collection of scaiola, but a lot of it's in need of repair, which will be a job for whoever holds my position to be involved with over the coming years. And so it's a trade-off. They save money on the front end, but you will spend it on the back end. But still, it's a gorgeous material, and the art of creating scaiola dates to the Renaissance, to the Italian Renaissance. So it's an ancient art. So it's really an honor to have that here, even though the marble would have lasted longer.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's special.
Well, the design of the building, the one thing we think is super special, and we are now a National Historic Landmark, and we made this point when we had to, there's a lot of misconception about the National Register of Historic Places and National Historic Landmarks. Well, they start with the word national, so and it's got the word historic in it, so naturally people confuse them. The National Register of Historic Places, and I'm sure there's homes and buildings in your town that are on the National Register of Historic Places. There are 95,000, give or take, buildings in the United States that are on the National Register of Historic Places. The state capitol had been on the National Register of Historic Places since the 1960s. The National Historic Landmark status, only 3% of the buildings that are on the National Register ever make it to that high mark of National Historic Landmark. You have to truly have national history significance. Your building has to be significant in some way. And so there are buildings in America that are National Historic Landmarks because of the events that happen there. For example, the Louisiana Capitol is a National Historic Landmark because, unfortunately, their governor was assassinated there. So you don't want to get onto you don't want to be an NHL for that reason, but it happens sometimes. It can be archaeology, it can be historic events. We are designated an NHL because of our architecture. And we were one of the first capitals in the country built after the turn of the century that used the Mozart Style. And Mozart is very highly decorative architecture. As you say, you look around and you will never get through seeing details in this building. I don't care how long you work here, you can look up at some point and go, I have never noticed that. Because there's so much for the eye to take in until it's hard to retain it all. But the Mozart Style, it has a central pavilion that houses the main rotundas, and it's capped off by the dome, and our dome has an eagle on it, and not all capitals have an eagle on it. And then you have two wings that go straight down that house the legislative chambers and offices, and that's the Mozart Style. You have a very prominent central pavilion with decorated columns and that sort of thing, and that's what we have. And that style really came into vogue right at the turn of the century. And one of our arguments to the Department of Interior about our being designated, that is, we felt like we were on the forefront of that type of architecture style being used, because after our building was built, Wisconsin was built, Idaho was built, and if you look up those capitals and look up ours, you will see that they're very similar in style, but ours was first, which for a rural southern state, 40 years out of the Civil War, still not recovered economically. For us to be able to build this building in those circumstances is just amazing to me. And hats off to the people that had the foresight to say, let's build a magnificent building, not just a building, but a grand building.
We went to the governor's mansion and saw just a preview of their Christmas holiday decorations. And I know there's something special, it's not here yet, but the Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Give us maybe a little bit about how y'all decorate and how you choose the tree.
Well, we have always used fresh trees in the building, and this year we are making a change that some of us are still, well, some of us don't even know about it. A lot of the staff won't know about it until they go up. We are using lighted artificial trees this year for the first time. Literally the first time in the Capitol's history, we will have 3 trees. 2 will be about 14 feet tall, and then the main tree on the first floor will be about 16 feet tall. The reason that we've chosen to go with this time is because we were never able to have lights on the tree, because when you cut a massive tree and bring it into a centrally heated building, and now we do it so early in order to have it open all during December, by the second or third week, the tree is beginning to dry out and it's beginning to turn. And the worst thing in the world you could do would be light a tree like that because of the fire danger. So we've made the choice this year, and it was a choice that took place over about a 2-year period of discussions. Committees actually approved this change, so we're going to see. I'm sure it'll be beautiful. It will be different. It will be different.
Well, if people want to come visit the Capitol, is it open to the public?
It is.
Or tell us how we would get to it.
It is open to the public. First of all, you can just simply go online and Google Mississippi State Capitol, and the website will pop up. And on there is all the tour information, and it gives you everything you need to know about how to book a tour. The Capitol is open Monday through Friday. It's open, it actually opens at about 7 in the morning, but our staff begins to arrive at 8, so we always say 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. You can walk in any time and pick up written materials from our visitor desk, which will give you a self-guided tour that you can take on your own. And most of the year, the Capitol is completely open. During the legislative session, in order to see the chambers, you have to go into the galleries and look down, because when the session is going on, which is January, it's 90-day sessions, except for the when you have a new administration come in. The first year, it's 125 days, and then thereafter, it's 90 days for the rest of that 4-year term. So January through March, January through April, that time frame, you're not able to always go onto the floor, or rarely able to go onto the floor of the chambers, but you can still see them. But the rest of the time, when the legislature's not here, you can walk about and see everything. Or you can arrange for a guided tour through our Visitor Services Department. And of course, I can give you that telephone number, or as I said, you can find it online. And we do guided tours 4 times a day for drop-in folks, and those times are listed on the website as well. For sure, of course, the Rotunda is the main thing to see, and that's where you will see the white Italian marble, and you will see the columns, and we can do this however you want to do it as far as the voiceover. But one of the most interesting things about this building, when Mr. Lake's plans were chosen by Bernard Green, the one thing Mr. Green changed was he raised the dome. Mr. Green had lower domes on this building. Bernard Green said, bring in the natural light. And so he raised the dome and put in windows in the dome that allow natural light. Also, he recommended a skylight system, which is on our roof today. On the wings of the Capitol, there's a skylight system that runs the entire length of the building. And most people think about skylights as sitting flat in a roof. These sit at an angle. They're big panels that sit at an angle and bring the sunlight in from whatever direction. And so then when you go into our 4th floor, you look up and you see flat stained glass panels, and that skylight system is bringing the light in through those panels. But the neatest thing is he carries that forward down to the 3rd floor. On the 4th floor, you will see in the mosaic tile up there glass cylinders. And those glass cylinders allow that light from the roof that comes down through the ceiling in the 4th floor to go through the floor of the 4th floor down to the 3rd floor. It's quite remarkable.
That is amazing.
And in my job, I deal with a lot of people that come here to make repairs and to give me quotes and to look at, things, projects that we have. And I cannot tell you through the years the number of times that people have said to me, are those glass bottles still on the 4th floor? To which I always say yes. And then they will say, I came here when I was in the 5th grade, 7th grade, whatever. And I'm talking to like 40 and 50-year-old people that's what they remember. That's what they remember is the glass bottles. And so I think that kind of speaks to how impressive they are. We do get a lot of international visitors. We're happy for that. We get visitors from all over the country. Every state in the union has been here. Every state in the union representatives and visitors from every state has been here multiple times. We've had people come in. But we love it when Mississippians come here.
Mm-hmm.
When they make the special time and trip to bring their family and to make it a point to see their capital. And that's why, and we always say that we get excited when people walk in the door and we say, where are y'all from? And they say, we're from Fernando. And we go, that's great, because we want people to remember to come see their building. We do. So, in the 1960s, the Mississippi State Legislature designated the first floor of the Capitol as the Hall of Governors. And every governor who has been elected, save one, we do not have a portrait of Governor Lane at present hanging, but other than that, every governor who's been elected since the territorial governors all the way through our last full-term governor, which was Governor Barber, is hanging here on the 1st floor. Their portraits are hanging here on the 1st floor. Governor Elaine decided not to have his portrait done when he left office. He just thought, he was a very frugal individual, thought it was kind of a waste of money, but his family has done this, and so in coming few months his portrait will be donated, and so we will have everyone's portrait up. What you're looking at is a swastika. It is an ancient East Indian symbol of good luck and well-being and welcome. In 1928, the Nazi Party took this and co-opted it as their own, reversing it. They actually flipped it, if you care to ever make that comparison. Added their color, the red and the black, to it, and turned it into a symbol that is hard to talk about today, even the word, when we use the word swastika, but that's what it's called. In the 1940s, there was some conversation about removing this, and I'm not sure who, most likely people from Archives and History or other historians, pointed out that it was an original 1903 design meant to bid welcome and well-being to the people that enter this chamber. And you can still see it's used. It's interesting to me. It's used across cultures and across religions. Again, no marble in here at all. Now the house chamber does have that marble base. No marble in here. Just scaiola in the columns and scaiola on the walls. This wonderful light fixture here on deck. That intertwining decorative pattern here is called the oche, where it kind of winds into each other, and then adding the light into it was Mr. Link's idea. The desks in this chamber were not original. The desks in the house chamber are. The desks over here were replaced in the 1950s, and why I do not know. Underneath the floor in both chambers there is mosaic tile, and it's white. It's the reverse pattern of the carpet. It's white tile with gold and blue in the tile. But can you imagine the acoustics with a tile floor? So that must have been over the years why they decided to put in tile. And this, carpet. And this carpet that's here was put in during the 79 to 82 restoration. And yeah, and it was done by a mill in Greenville, Mississippi, that is no longer operating, which I hate to hear that. It was called Greenville Mills. And during that 79 to 82 restoration, this building was closed for 3 years, and they spent $19 million restoring it. And because of that restoration, we are not in the position that a lot of state capitals our age and older are. You hear about capitals having to spend $100 million to do a restoration, or $200 million to do a restoration, which takes my breath away when I think about those numbers. But it's because they never did anything through the years. Well, we've done little things through the years, and doing that restoration 35 years ago helped us so much. There you go. And of course, it's the eagle without his gilding on him. So he is copper. And look at the detail. I'm just amazed at the detail that the man who crafted this eagle put into it. All the feathers, and he even gave him a tongue.
Look at that. But that's
because the man knew he was going to sit on top of a massive building. So the fact that he put as much detail. But unfortunately, through the years, if these tiles broke, they didn't replace them, or if they needed to run electrical conduit, they just come outside the tiles and put it. Things that today we would probably not think of doing, but back then. But the interesting story about this ceiling, when we designed the ceiling, it was this barrel. It's called a barrel ceiling, and the griffins that you see there, which are a mythical figure that have absolutely nothing to do with Mississippi history, they were actually added in the 1930s when Governor Bilbo was governor. And the story goes that in the 1950s, when the advent of window air conditioners came in, and they came below where the griffins are, along that what's called a freeze line there, and put in an acoustical tile ceiling, just a plain old white acoustical tile ceiling. And that was to keep the cool air from all dissipating up into the ceiling there. And a generation basically passed, 25 years passed, and they were getting ready to do the restoration of this entire building. And the gentleman that was documenting what it looked like before raised one of those acoustic tile ceilings. And back then, he just put a camera up in there and snapped some shots. He wasn't even looking. He just was on a ladder. And of course, back then, you had to wait for the film to be developed. So a few days later, he gets his film developed. And he's actually a professional photographer, so I guess he's developing it himself. And that's what it came back, that all of that was up there. And people had forgotten about it. There were historic photographs that showed the ceiling as it was, but none of them showed the griffins. And like I said, the griffins were put in the 1930s. So then the argument started, do we leave the griffins, do we take them away? Because technically they're not historic to the building, but yet in a way they are. And so they did leave them. What dropped? Oh, is that mine? Sorry.
Now, this is, for the people that don't know where we are, we are in the governor's office.
And we call it sometimes the governor's ceremonial office, but that's the name that's been assigned to it through the years. I just say the governor's capital office to differentiate between the fact that he has his main office over at the Sillars building, which is across the street from the Capitol. He also most likely has a working office at the governor's residence. I'm sure at the mansion in the residential part, there's a space where he works at times. And of course, he's mostly in this office when the legislature is in session. He has, and this is true with every governor. Their staff would be over here, and they would be over here too, depending upon how often they choose to come in. yeah, the front pieces for the mantle were missing at the time of the restoration, and they were able to find historic photographs of the mantles and were able to get them reproduced. A mill workshop in New Orleans reproduced them. And this, of course, is marble, but you can see that the wainscoting around is not marble, it's just painted to look like marble. But I think the ceiling, of course, is majestic, and here this floor is absolutely phenomenal.
This is just
In this formal space, the Grand Rotunda, or just the Rotunda, we call it, you will see all the orders of architecture represented somewhere in here. The columns are composite, and in that composite column you have the Corinthian and the Ionic at the top, which means the two together are the composite. This is where I talked about earlier that we have both white Italian marble and also scagliola. These grand columns were scagliola, and yet the walls behind them and the floor are marble, and I'm not sure if it'll show up on the film, but you can see the different coloration, and you can touch this and see the little cracks in the scagliola and see that it's not, but at a glance it looks like, it does look like marble. The rail is cast iron, and all the balustrades all the way up are cast iron. Now the one on the top you can see has wood, and they diminish in height as they go up to kind of give the illusion of more height, but also it to me it speaks of the significance of each floor. And I think of the second floor as the people's floor, where they gather. I think of the first floor as the people's floor because that leads out into the galleries. But when this building was first built, and Mr. Link put a good deal of thought into how he designed the building. He put the Supreme Court on the second floor to separate them from the governor and from the legislative chambers, which is on the third floor. And down the hall here, and we can walk and see the Supreme Court. Well, the Supreme Court was here until 1972, at which time they moved across the street from the Capitol to the Carroll Garton Justice Building. Carroll Garton was a former lieutenant governor who had served in other capacities, and he died while in office as lieutenant governor, so the building is named, the Justice Building is named for him. And then down on the other end, where it says State Library, that actually was not just a traditional library, it was the library for the legislature and for the Supreme Court. And but again, in the notes that we have, and we do have the State House Commission notes, Mr. Link talks about how he puts the legislative chambers to separate them away from the judicial, so that they have their own floor and their own space in which to operate, and locating the governor kind of centrally in between the two chambers is it will finally come back to him. This was not the first electric building in the state, but it was certainly the most grand all electric building. Not all electric. We did have gas power here, but all total, we have 4,750 light bulbs in the building, and 750 of those are here in this rotunda. They're disposed. And people ask us a lot about LED lighting, when we'll switch to LED, and the answer is when the LED industry produces one that mimics the incandescent, and they're close, but they still have a little bit of a green or blue cast to them. And this was done not just for light, it was done for an architectural effect. So this is part of the historical character and the integrity of the building. So until we want to do LED one day, but not until we're able to have them. And they also have to be cool to the touch. And some LEDs, the bulb is cool to the touch, but the base is not. But everything that's under globe is already LED. So, because we are conscious of the fact that it does. When when the building was built, a lot of the surfaces that you're seeing now with color in them were not. It was very monochromatic. It was a lot of white. The dome was white. It wasn't until the 1930s. There was in the 1930s it so often in a lot of public buildings. The WPA did a project here where they added in a lot of artwork and color, and that's when the color was added to the domes. And I would say, and they recognize that it's a design flaw. There was one small design flaw up there where you see those medallions. There used to be light fixtures up there. I have photographs that show the light fixtures. And if you think getting to those up there to change them would be difficult, getting to those light fixtures long before they had hydraulic lifts must have been really, really hard to get to. So in the 1930s, the fixtures were taken down, and those medallions, painted medallions representing different parts of Mississippi history were put up there. So this is not quite as dark, but it's that same sienna. But in here you have black marble. You have black marble from New York.
So this is the sienna, and then this is black marble.
Right.
Okay.
And the speaker's dais is walnut, and it is original, except of course for the addition there where they have all the computers in. You can see the addition that's been added, but all the carving and all that on the dais is original. And the well is original. And your chamber, the house chamber, is the only one where we have the coat of arms. It's the only place in the building where we have the coat of arms, is in the house chamber. And every architectural detail in classical architecture is somewhere in this building. The egg and dart is the most prominent one, and you see the egg and dart there above the arches, above where the seating is back in there. And but you see the exaggerated version of like an egg and leaf up in here, and but they all this different decorative detail that you see dates back to classical architecture, and that is something that you'll see in just about every Mozart building. The stained glass throughout the building was made, and I hate that you can't get a good shot of those monumental windows, but because we still got plywood behind them to protect them, so the light doesn't come through, and it looks so different with the light.
It does.
We starting in 2010 and ending this January, we have done a complete exterior restoration of this building, starting with the eagle, which we'll talk more about in just in a little while, and all the way down to the bottom of the building. Basically, the exterior masonry was cleaned and repointed. The dome has been waterproofed. The skylight system that I mentioned earlier, we've replaced panels up there. It's new panels with UV protection in them. Some of the original panels were actually still up there. Not many, but some of the original panels have made it through all, to think about all the rain and the wind and the storms and the ice and the different things that they've made it through. But one of our biggest, I think, accomplishments in this exterior restoration was that every exterior window was removed and restored, including all the stained glass windows. And what's yet to be done and upcoming one day, and people will get a chance to vote on the appropriation for this, is these chambers are ready to be restored. It's been 35 years since the restoration. And so where you see light bulbs not burning, sometimes they just don't work. And all this stained glass needs to be restored as well. Not just the glass itself, but the support system that's holding it up there. There's a lot of weight hanging there. But the stained glass was designed by a man named Louis Millay, and Mr. Millay was from Chicago, and he was one of the founders of the Chicago Art Institute. And so the folks up in Chicago know a lot about Millay. He's not as famous as Tiffany, but he was in the same era as Tiffany. But I personally think his work is just astounding. It really is.
Just phenomenal. Now, are those his too?
Yes,
Ones that-
throughout the building,
Okay.
you see his work. And of course, we always give him the credit, and you know he had a lot of artisans working with him. Matter of fact, his wife worked with him as well. And you'd love to know each individual